Welcome in to a Monday edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com. John Alden with you, as always. I hope you had yourself a really good weekend. I had a good weekend, a lot of rest, a lot of sports intake, a lot of good stuff, and we're going to get into some of that today. I guess good stuff, I guess that's relative to what I could be referring to. The Indiana basketball side of things. Less than good stuff. And that will probably be the majority of what we talk about today. I got a few different things we're going to get into. And Drew Rosenberg of HoosierIllustrated.com going to chat about a number of things with us today as well, including Indiana men's basketball. Also going to dive into a little bit of the NBA, as we typically do when he comes on. And then he and I also have a little bit of a discussion about the NFC and AFC championship games. Because normally I don't talk about the NFL too much, but normally when I do, it's just kind of me talking to myself or talking to you guys. So it's nice to chit-chat about the NFL with somebody else, especially with the games that we had last night. I mean, first of all, the Commanders-Eagles, not that was a competitive game, but just the fact that that was the game that it was. I mean, 55-23, you have that many points scored in an NFL game. I mean, the Eagles are insane, man. And Saquon Barkley is on another level. I feel like it's been a while. I mean, I guess Christian McCaffrey was also a pretty good running back, but he's been injured the entire season and haven't got to see him take the next step forward. But Saquon Barkley, he is without a doubt the running back to be when it comes to the NFL. And they'll go up against the mighty Kansas City Chiefs, trying to three-peat. And as much as I hate the Chiefs, I don't think I would completely hate seeing them get the three-peat. And I know the whole dynasty thing is like we've seen that with the Patriots before, not the three-peat, but just, winning so much. But I mean, we've never seen a three-time consecutive champion before in the NFL. The fact that we've had this many, we're in Super Bowl, was it 59? I think the fact that you've had that many of these and you've never had consecutive champions. That's three consecutive champions. I mean, I guess that's not super crazy, right? Even though it felt like maybe the Patriots won 5 or 6 in a row, that was never the case. But it'll be interesting to see how that ends up playing out in a couple of weeks. And I think I'm still deep down rooting for the Eagles just because, and it's a lot of it has to do with just, my wife being a Bills fan. She was very disappointed with how that game turned out last night. And, but hopefully, I hope Josh Allen's time isn't running out with the Bills, but we'll have to wait and see. We'll have to wait till next year. We're almost at the end of football, guys, which means it's a sad day for me. I've really grown to love football over the years. And I guess it's just part of becoming an adult in the United States of America, is really just embracing football culture. I mean, I know that in Indiana and the surrounding area, basketball can be king, but we've seen kind of a new renaissance in not just NFL, but like just football in general. College football has quickly become the second most popular sport behind the NFL. I'd say that used to be the NBA, but the NBA's product over the last decade, if you will, has just been different. It's not been what we used to be, I don't know what it is. Maybe it was the beginning of the super team era that ruined all of that, but oh well. I'm kind of getting off onto random little tangents. This is In Touch with Indiana Sports, after all, and I'm sure many of you tuned in to hear thoughts on what's been going on with Indiana basketball, because what happened on Sunday was interesting. It was unfortunate. It was wild. It was not maybe it is what fans wanted, because there is a large sector of the fan base now that is ready to move on from Mike Woodson. And the loss on Sunday definitely speeds that process up a little bit. And if you want to hear our immediate reactions to what happened, be sure to check out the HoosierIllustrated.com postgame wrap-up show right here on Hoosier Illustrated. If you missed that, don't tune out of In Touch with Indiana Sports. I'd hope you wouldn't. But if you want more of mine and Kyler Staley's initial reactions to what happened basically as soon as the game ended, check that video out as well, right here where you're watching this show right here on Hoosier Illustrated. So Indiana basketball, where are they right now? They're now 14-7. They're 500 in conference play, and it really feels like I think we all know this, and we said this on last week's show, that in order for Indiana to really have a chance at reaching at least some of their goals from the preseason, they needed to beat Maryland to kind of kickstart what's coming up here with a big stretch that begins with Purdue this Friday. And now that you've lost that game against Maryland, especially in the manner in which you lost it, you shot yourself in the foot more ways than you needed to. You missed free throws. The refs didn't really do much to help out by missing a very obvious traveling call. And I don't want to talk about that too much. Just we did hit on that during the post-game wrap-up show, and I don't like to harp on officiating. I think that's kind of played out. It did kind of swing the game a little bit. Like with that no call allowed Maryland to hit what was the game-winning three-pointer. But Indiana shouldn't have put themselves in that position in the first place. And I think that's what we have to remember, right? If Galloway knocks down free throws, if Indiana doesn't let Maryland come back after they go up 6 in general, there's plenty of controllable things Indiana could have done to, not put themselves in that situation for the ref to have to make a decision or not make a decision, whatever that may be. But Indiana looked very lackluster, as they have at the end of games from time to time this year. They've looked good in other cases. They look like they were going to finish off this game very well. Anthony Leal, his performance and the good that he had, the good moments he had in this game, especially in the final few minutes, I feel like not many people are talking about that or even really thinking about it, just because of all of the negative things that happen. And, that's just the way things go whenever the program is kind of in the state that it is. But Anthony Leal had a heck of a performance down the stretch, defensively and offensively. Wasn't afraid of the big bucket, hit a couple of big-time baskets to really put Indiana in position to potentially win. Unfortunately, ended up not being the case. But here we are. Indiana goes into Purdue this Friday in West Lafayette. And what I think is, it's kind of, and again, I'm going to preface this by saying that, as always, for those who may be new to the show, potentially, I don't have any connections with IU. I don't have like any secret intel. Like everything I talk about, for the most part, is my own just kind of instinct, intuition, if you will, whatever you want to call it, or just how I think things like could realistically play out. I feel like I have a pretty good head on my shoulders, and I kind of see things playing out. And again, not that I had intel, because I didn't, but I predicted that Tom Allen would be let go a couple of years ago, or whenever that was, before it was inevitable. And it's not because I knew anything, because a lot of people were making the argument like, oh, the buyout's too much. Indiana's not going to pay to get rid of it. They don't care about football. Well, I kind of saw through that a little bit, just because I felt that with the way things were changing in college football, all of the different things that were coming in, the new teams of the Big Ten, the 12-team playoff, I was like, if Indiana's going to make a move, it has to be at the end of this season. So I know it sounds like I'm tooting my own horn, and I don't really like to do that. And if that's the way that's coming across, then, so be it. But anyway, to my point about this, I feel like with this upcoming game against Purdue, I kind of feel like, depending on how the result plays out, it could do a number of things, for one. And I know right now it's fairly inevitable what is likely going to happen at the end of the season. Like, regardless, we're not even talking throwing results in there, like future results and specifics and that sort of thing. it would surprise me at this point if Indiana doesn't move on from Mike Woodson at some point between now and the end of the season. But things could really the process could be sped up if things get ugly in West Lafayette on Friday. And I'm not predicting anything, but like let's look back to, and I know this was the end of the season with the scenario I'm about to bring up, but it surely didn't help. When you got to the end of the football season last year, Purdue has one of the worst seasons in their history, and they cap it off with a 66-0 blowout loss in Bloomington to kind of see like, okay, we like Ryan Walters, even though it's only been 2 years, we can't let that happen again to our arch nemesis, the Hoosiers. And again, it probably wouldn't have mattered. I mean, even if Purdue would have won that game, it wouldn't. I mean, maybe that would have bought Ryan Walters sometime. Who knows? But that's the beauty of rivalry games. And so I guess back to what I was saying, I kind of feel like I'm dancing all over the place. But hopefully my point eventually makes sense if it doesn't yet. But if Indiana goes into Mackey Arena and gets blown out by 30 points, and I'm not saying that'll happen, but if that happens, you're going to have a number of people calling for Mike Woodson to be let go immediately after that. It's a very sticky, tricky situation though, just because Mike Woodson is an alum. He also did do very well against Purdue in his first couple of seasons. And, things have slowly shifted back in the other direction. I mean, that was his signature. Those were his signature victories back in the first year. He swept Purdue in his first season with Indiana, which was, I mean, that was a huge moment. I remember the big fist pump in Assembly Hall when Indiana beat Purdue. Like things were rolling right there at that point for Indiana. And people thought, okay, wow, Mike Woodson can do something that Archie Miller was never able to do. Beat the Boilermakers. Okay, we're in good shape. So that being said, if Indiana goes in and we just talked about the blowout scenario, I think Mike Woodson can absolutely temporarily buy himself some grace and more time, if you will, if you go into West Lafayette and beat Purdue. For one, it's showing that he can still beat his rival, and it shows that he cares. And I do think Mike Woodson cares. Does that mean he's the best coach? Not necessarily, but I do think he cares about doing, being a good coach on the floor. I'm not necessarily saying he loves his off the floor duties, because I know a lot of people complain about those, and rightfully so. But I do think Mike Woodson cares about how he is perceived as a coach on the sideline, and he should, of course. So when it comes to the game against Purdue, I do think that it will be you're going to see Indiana come out and fight in that game. But maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe the Maryland game was, especially with the way things played out there, maybe that just shows where things are heading, and it's just inevitable that this team isn't going to mesh together. They can't always figure out how to win down the stretch, and we're not asking them to be perfect, but you're 14-7 at this point, right? 5-5 in the conference, as we already mentioned. And so there's too many question marks at this point in the season to where you don't want to be in this position if you're Indiana basketball. And now I feel like I'm able to circle back around to the point I was trying to make. You beat Purdue. If Mike Woodson beats Purdue, and you have this stretch of opportunities, as you heard myself and Ant talk about last week, there is still, honestly, sometimes I feel like I'm just wasting my breath, because I know that we kind of see the writing on the wall, but we do still have to throw out, like, they still have to play the games, right? So if you start off this stretch with a win at Purdue, I think that's about the only thing that could really, like, your back's against the wall at that point. We saw Indiana last year with their back against the wall, where they very nearly played themselves into the NCAA tournament. Now, again, this goes back to the bigger picture. Like, Indiana shouldn't be in this position in the first place. At the beginning of the season, we were talking Big Ten title, top 3 or 4 team in the Big Ten. like 4 or 5 at the worst, and now they're slowly falling to the back portion of the conference standings. And so I don't know. I think it would make things a lot easier if Indiana just. I don't want them to tank. I don't want that. I'm sure it might come across that way, but if they got blown out with Purdue, I think at that point we can definitively say, okay, this thing is done, and it's just a matter of when, not if, at this point. And maybe it is still that right now. I mean, I think most people by now are on the same page when it comes to Mike Woodson and his tenure at Indiana and just the overall trajectory of the program. It's not where it should be, especially with when you think about those who may utilize the resources a little bit more efficiently than what Mike Woodson has done, right? Like he's been able to get guys in the transfer portal with his NIL war chest, but who's the guy who can make all these pieces mesh together really well? Because somebody out there, if given the opportunity, will find a way to succeed with all this. It shouldn't be hard to win at Indiana for basketball, right? It's been difficult for the last several, couple of decades, if we're being honest. I mean, Tom Crean had some success a couple of different seasons, but I mean, outside of that, I mean, look what Kurt Signetti did in year 1 in Indiana for football, a program that has been the laughingstock of college football forever. If Kurt Signetti can do that in 1 year with a historically crappy football program, what can a good coach, even a above average head coach, do at Indiana? And I don't know, is Mike Woodson above average? I would say he's average to below average. That's what I would say he is. But what is I hate saying that. What the hell do I know? I'm just a middling fan that feels like he knows what he sees and what's good and what's not. I know I'm not a head coach. I've never been a head coach, and I don't want to act like I know more than Mike Woodson. But I think a lot of people who know the game would agree with me that he or know and have known and played the game would say that Mike Woodson is kind of at that level. So anyway, that's kind of my, I guess, opening monologue, if you will, on where things are at with Indiana basketball at this point in time. So we'll continue this discussion right here with Drew Rosenberg. As I mentioned earlier, we'll also talk about some of the NBA and more on what happened with the NFL playoff games this weekend. So we'll turn it over to that segment right now. From HoosierIllustrated.com, it is none other than Drew Rosenberg of the Talking About the Hoosiers podcast. Also, of course, a staff writer for the site. Thank you, as always, for coming on to do a little In Touch with Indiana Sports with me, my friend.
Yeah, of course. Plenty to talk about. Busy Sunday. IU just out across the sports, honestly.
Yeah, we're going to hit on a lot of things over the next however many minutes this segment ends up being. We're going to talk, of course, about Indiana basketball. Usually when we have Drew on here, we talk about the NBA, so we'll hit on that as well. We're also going to do a little talking about the NFL, the NFC, AFC championship games. Normally, for those who watch the show regularly, I just kind of talk to myself about the NFL, and I'm perfectly fine doing that, but it's nice to talk with somebody else about it every once in a while. So we'll pick Drew's brain on what he thought about what happened with both NFC, AFC championship games. But before we get to that, let's start with a little bit of basketball. The Hoosiers are more than disappointing at this point, right? We knew that the Maryland game was a must-win situation. We've seen them in that situation a few times this year. I felt like the road game at Ohio State, they delivered in that must-win road game. A lot of people thought Northwestern last week was also in that category. Mm-hmm. I was kind of there, but then after it happened, I was like, you know what? If they can rebound by getting a home win against Maryland before this tough stretch, maybe it kind of balances itself out. Well, with the way things played out toward the end of the game against the Terps, I mean, really, you couldn't have drawn up a worse way to end those final 60 seconds to 90 seconds, whatever it was, really beginning with Trey Galloway's missed free throw.
Yeah.
He had the front end of a 1-on-1. If you would have hit both of those, you would have been up 4 points, I believe. I don't remember what the exact score was off the top of my head at that moment. But you'd have been up 4 points, 2 possessions, unless you foul somebody on a 3-point shot, of course. Galloway fails at the free throws. You come down, you have the travel from one of the Maryland players whose name I don't remember off the top of my head, of course. And then, of course, the Rodney Rice 3-pointer to give Maryland the lead for good, and just messiness down on the other end of the floor off the inbound, and a number of other things we'll get into. But Drew, just kind of your thoughts on how things played out on Sunday afternoon for Indiana.
I mean, that was just incredibly frustrating. Anthony Leal gets an and one, go up 4, I think, with 38 seconds left, give or take. And from there, it's like, all right, Indiana should win this game. You're up 4, just got to get some stops. And then from there, it was everything that could have went wrong. First, I think it was Jacoby Gillespie got a really easy look to cut it to 2. Then you mentioned Trey Galloway missing free throws. And it wasn't just Galloway. He obviously missed the biggest free throws of the game. But everyone was missing free throws that game. I think Carlisle missed 2 earlier in the game. And then from there, you mentioned the travel, but even going back that, you were supposed to foul. Woodson said it after the game. It seemed like coaches wanted them to foul. They had the opportunity to foul. They didn't. And you do the one thing you really can't do. You can't allow a shooter to get an open look from 3 up 2. And Rodney Rice, did what he had done all game, buried it. And then you go to that last possession. I don't know what the original play was drawn up, but Renew loses out of bounds, and now you're kind of in a weird baseline out of bounds situation. And just absolute mess of a play there. It was one of those games where it's like Indiana should win this game, and just everything that could have went wrong. It's like they wanted to lose the game almost. It felt like watching it was like everything they could have done to lose that game, they did. It kind of felt like I watched a game 2 days ago, Kansas versus Houston. Not sure if you watched that game, but it had a similar vibe of everything going wrong at the worst possible time.
And then to kind of cap it all off, I don't know if this was noticed during, but I did see somebody post a video of this after the game. Of course, it was, during what would have been the handshake line. Luke Goody has to kind of go remind Mike Woodson that, hey, we need to go shake hands real quick. I don't know if that was just an honest slip up or if Woodson was genuinely trying to avoid the handshake line. But no matter what the reasoning is, it still just shows, it really just kind of adds an exclamation point to all the discombobulation that happened in those final few seconds for Indiana.
Yeah, it was chaos. The last shot was as bad of a look as you can create. I don't know what the play was there. Was Renew supposed to go out there, get the ball at the corner, but both Renew and Rice are there, and you're just in a coffin corner, no space, and Rice is forced to throw up a prayer. And it was just really, the whole, final stretch just made no sense from a pure watching point. You're like, you have a foul to give, you can give the foul. And it just seemed like just lack of cohesiveness. And it's the stuff we've been saying all year with this team, the attention to detail, just the little things. They don't do them consistently enough. And this is a talented team. We've talked about it. There's a lot of money spent in this roster, but you have to do the little things. And this team doesn't do the little things.
Yeah, at this point now, you're 14-7. You're 5-5 in the Big Ten. You have what is without a doubt your toughest stretch of games coming up, beginning this Friday at Purdue. And during the post-game wrap-up show, I kind of posed this little, I don't know if it's a question or a statement, whatever it was, but I also put it on Twitter, X, after the game as well. But with how angry the fan base is. And I know not you can't always listen to the fans if you're somebody who is in a position where you have to decide whether you're going to get rid of somebody, all that sort of stuff. You have to be level-headed throughout the entire process. But with the way things have gone, and if you go into West Lafayette on Friday and it becomes a bloodbath of sorts against the Boilers where things just aren't clicking, you look like a mess, it's another one of those blowout losses for a Mike Woodson-led Indiana team. Do you think that's enough to make Indiana pull the trigger? Because you're in a weird spot. Mike Woodson isn't just a head coach that's struggling to get wins. He's a former alumni. And this is something that Indiana hasn't been in the position with before, to my knowledge. I mean, maybe back in the day you had alums coaching back whenever it was maybe more of a common thing, not just necessarily guys from the NBA, of course.
Yeah.
But when you have someone who, whenever he was hired, there was kind of this feeling of unification. Like, you're going to bring the old guard with the new guard with Mike Woodson. He has these NBA connections. He's going to be able to bring a lot of young talent who aspire to get to the NBA. And he's been able to do that. But the results on the floor kind of show a different story, of course, right? And so it's going to be an ugly breakup whenever it happens.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm kind of caught in between whether or not I just don't think being an alum, if things were to go very wrong here down the stretch, not even just against Purdue, let's just say things continue to spiral. Do you think they would give Mike Woodson until the end of the season to let him go? Or do you think there is a scenario where if things got ugly enough, they would say, you know what, you've done enough, but we appreciate what you did in those first few seasons, but we've got to move on? I know that may be a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's kind of, how do you maybe see things potentially playing out as these next few games, come forward?
I personally don't see Mike Woodson getting fired mid-season, unless it's really everything goes wrong to the point. Because if you fire Mike Woodson like at the halfway point, like if you fire him now, like there's a lot of basketball left. Indiana could still go on a run. I'm not saying that's going to happen. They've shown me nothing to make me believe that that's going to happen at this point in time. But that could happen. You fire Mike Woodson, that's admitting defeat. That's admitting season's over mid-season. So unless, the wheels really do fall off and, this team starts getting blown out by 30 every game and the season really is over, then I could see it. Other than that, I think they'll let Mike Woodson finish off the year. But I do want to kind of bring up a point with Mike Woodson's hiring. When Mike Woodson was hired, this program was in a lot different place. It was in a lot worse place. There was a reason, Mike Woodson was really the only guy Indiana could get to even consider the job at that point in time. They people wanted the big names, but the big names didn't want to come. Now I think the program's in a much better place than it was after Archie. And as much as people don't want to admit that, this program is in a better place than it was 4 years ago. And there is a foundation for a new coach to come in and be successful, which is something that I really didn't know if was clear after Archie was fired.
Well, one thing that will be different that wasn't a part of the selling point in the previous hiring cycle was that we weren't in this era of NIL transfer portal yet. Mike Woodson's the first Indiana basketball coach to deal with that. And so that's going to be something very appealing to whenever we get to that. And honestly, part of me feels like I'm getting ahead of myself, but at the same time, we know the writing's on the wall. Unless things dramatically change over the course of these next couple of weeks, there's no reason to doubt. There's no reason we can't have this conversation. I feel like there's probably a few people that say, don't talk about this type of stuff until it happens. Well, you know what? Unless they start doing something different on the court, there's no reason we can't go ahead and talk about this type of stuff, in my opinion. But anyway, whenever the inevitable happens, we'll call it that. Whoever ends up thinking about wanting to take this job, the different appeal is going to be the war chest of NIL that we've seen. And if they know how they're going to utilize it versus how Mike Woodson's utilized it versus what they're able to do on the floor, I think that's going to give Indiana a very good advantage in year one of whoever would be this hypothetical next coach.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason this job will be really desirable. The Hoosiers Connect is a powerhouse. We've seen it. It's starting to translate a little bit to the college football game as Cignetti's they've opened the war chest a bit for him. And you see Indiana landing top commits in football, but you just look at this offseason basketball. If you were going based off program alone and what you saw from the 2023, 2024 team, I don't think Indiana lands a top recruiting class or transfer class. They did. Mike Woodson was able to bring in, as much as you want to criticize the team right now. Umar Balla was, I think, the number 2 ranked player. Miles Rice, Cannon Carlisle were both top 15 guys in the portal rankings. Luke Goody was a big recruit. I know he's a local guy, but Mike Woodson loaded up in the transfer portal. Yeah, it has not worked out how he hoped. But if Mike Woodson can do this, I mean, look at I'm just going to throw some names I've seen, like Scott Drew's name, Bruce Pearl. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I doubt either of those guys leaves, but what could a coach do with the war chest that Indiana has?
Yeah, and also along those same lines, the guys who I feel like most of these guys, especially looking at it now, I don't think they committed to Mike Woodson. And I don't even necessarily think they committed to Indiana. And some people won't like hearing that, but they
Yeah.
committed to the money that they were offered. That's this new world that we're in. Yes, guys like Luke Goody, it's probably a combination of the two, right? He's a homegrown guy. He played the majority of his career at Illinois. Why not finish his career back where he played high school ball, that sort of thing? But guys like Umar Ballo, this is his, third school? Fourth school? I don't know, for Gonzaga, Arizona, Indiana. I don't know if I'm forgetting any other stops he may have had along the way. But Umar Ballo, I mean, I don't want to speak for the guy, but he's looking for the biggest paycheck, and rightfully so, because somebody like him is not as valued in the NBA, as he would have been 5 to 10 years ago. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah.
Whatever.
No, you're right. I mean, I don't know if you saw Rick Pitino talking about it with Kaderi Richmond, St. John's best player. He was Seton Hall's best player last year. He talked about why Kaderi Richmond left Seton Hall. It's not because of Shaheen Holloway. It had nothing to do with like St. John's. It was just the money wasn't even close. If the money was even a little bit close, Richmond might have stayed at Seton Hall, but instead St. John's offers them this bag that Seton Hall can't compete with. So obviously he's going to, take the money. Obviously going to a rival is brutal, but it's like when the money's not even close at a certain point, you got to do what's best for you. And we've seen guys do that, and it's going to happen more and more.
Very interesting stuff. I don't want to continue too far down this path, but again, if things continue to progress in the wrong direction, so to speak, I mean, this will become more of a relevant talking point. And if for some reason, honestly, I do think most fans are on the same page at this point. But if you're somebody who, is a purist and, doesn't want to talk about this type of stuff until after it's done, I mean, I guess I apologize for jumping that gun, but that's just, we do what we want, right? Sometimes it is what it is. I honestly don't think I'm offending anybody, but for some reason I just feel the need to just say that. Anyway, let's move on to a little bit of NBA stuff, some more positive things. I was going to initially, let's do this anyway. Let's talk about the Pacers in France and Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs. What do you kind of think of this whole NBA Paris games? And of course, with Wembanyama, you have the fact that he is a Frenchman himself. Do you like the way that they did that this year? I'm sure.
Yeah, I love it. Honestly, I think basketball is a global game. We see it at the Olympics. The rest of the world has. I know the U.S. won the gold, but the rest of the world is caught up. It's not like a free gold medal every 4 years for the U.S. when they can just show up for 3 weeks. I don't know if you've seen any of the documentary stuff. Really excited to see that Netflix documentary. But basketball is caught up, and it's only growing the game, which is something that I don't want to say needs to happen because it doesn't. Basketball's in a pretty good place right now. And I know people like to criticize the NBA and a lot of things, and there certainly is problems. So there's problems with every major sports league. But, going to Paris, I think they've gone to Mexico City in the past. Like, it grows the game, and I'm sure they'll have games in Germany, London, in the next 10 to 15 years. I know they've had preseason games in China in the past. It's really good for the game, and then having a guy like Wembanyama kind of be the face of that, French superstar. He's only 19 or 20, but he's a budding superstar, has generational potential. So seeing that is really cool. I kind of feel bad for the Pacers, like them splitting, and that was very good because, it's very much, I think they called it like a home and home, but in reality, it's 2 home games for the Spurs because everyone is rooting for San Antonio there just because of Wembanyama.
Do you feel like the Pacers, though, at least in the last few weeks, do you think they've turned a corner? Because at one point they had a losing record. They're now 25-20.
Yeah.
And I would say on pace to make a spot in the Eastern Conference playoffs. How do you feel you see their season playing out from this point?
Yeah, I think the Pacers are kind of scary where they are right now in the East. I don't think, anyone's going to want to play them in the first round just because of the way they play. I think we talked about it earlier in the year when they were struggling. It was like Tyrese Halliburton hadn't really figured it out. And it seems like Tyrese Halliburton is back to being, the, elite floor general that, you expect him to be. He's been over the last month or so. He's like the assist numbers are back up. The scoring is still, just below 20, but he's not a scorer. You have Pascal Siakam, you have Miles Turner, you have guys who can score the basketball for them. Like, this is a good basketball team. And the way they play, it's not like other teams. Like, everyone's like, oh, the Pacers don't play defense. It's not that. They play so fast. There's so many possessions. And a lot of times, open looks are generated when you're playing at that pace. So there is more scoring. And it's why they were such a weird matchup last year in the playoffs, because in the playoffs, usually teams want to slow it down. Well, the Pacers want to speed it up. And it's kind of that weird style that makes it tough. It's why Boston struggled with them. It's why New York struggled with them. And I don't think anyone wants to play them in the first round of the playoffs.
And again, they're kind of clicking. I don't remember exactly how last season played out, but it does kind of feel like they're on a very similar trajectory with, at least in terms of how they've kind of shifted momentum in their favor. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. How close are we to the All-Star break? Are we close to that at this point?
Yeah, I want to say we have like a few. I mean, trying to think of the date. I think February. It's like February 10th. I want to say.
Okay. I don't know why that feels. Did it used to be earlier in January? Again, as somebody who doesn't follow it as closely as maybe more, the more in tune people do.
It's usually one of the first weeks of February. I just looked it up. Okay. February 16th. So about 2-3 weeks left. This is like the weird point in the season. This is like you see teams kind of go through the lull, the January, just like looking ahead to the All-Star break. Because it's such a long season, 82 games. So this is like
it also feels like the All-Star break comes at. Like it should feel like it should be earlier in the season to me. I don't know why that is, because it feels like at this point you're already past the halfway point now, and when you get to the All-Star break, you'll be what, 2/3 of the way through the season, maybe.
Yeah. So usually, it's usually like that. I think just for the playoffs too, they try to split it in half from where the playoffs would be. I think is usually the idea. But you see a team, you see a team like Boston right now who's kind of struggling. They had a big win against Dallas, but I think they're 9-8 over their last 17, which for, a team most people think is going to win the championship and the, experts like favorites on DraftKings. This is it's kind of a concern right now for them. So they getting back on the right track, and it's the All-Star break. Once you kind of get to the All-Star break, that's where teams have to kind of figure it out. And after that All-Star break is where you see the good teams or the great teams separate from the good.
Let's talk about something that will be of interest to a lot of IU fans, of course, and that is what Kel'el Ware's been able to do over the last few weeks. If we're talking about, so Kyler Staley put this out on HoosierIllustrated.com not too long ago. This apparently, I didn't know this. So Kel'el Ware was able to do something that no NBA player had ever done in 40 years. That goes back to David Robinson. He had 20-plus points, 15-plus rebounds, and 2+ blocks in their first start of their NBA career. Drew, just kind of how do you feel Kel'el Ware has adjusted, especially he had some moments early on in the NBA in this NBA season where you knew he would be a pretty good rookie, but how's he been able to kind of turn things on over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's opportunity first. I think there's, a lot of stuff out of Miami right now with Jimmy Butler, and it's kind of opened a rotation for him to start alongside Bam Adebayo. I will be completely honest. I talked about this. I think me and Kyler did a podcast like immediately after he was drafted, talking about how like Kel'el Ware's skill set could play alongside Bam. Neither of us thought it would be as a rookie, but he's quickly developed, and we kind of see his game at IU. You could very much tell his game wasn't really like he's such a talented player. He's good for college, but he always had an NBA skill set. He can put the ball on the floor, which he really didn't get to showcase much at IU, but he can shoot the 3-ball, and he's an elite rim protector just so long that it's in the NBA today. If you are an elite rim protector, no matter how your skill set elsewhere, you're going to get an opportunity. You see a guy like Rudy Gobert, who's made a ton of money and is really valuable to the Timberwolves. He is really just an elite rim protector. The rest of his game is average at best. And then you see what he's able to add as a shooter, as a ball handler, rebounding. Just he's turned it up. He's the Rookie of the Year favorite for a reason right now. I think since the start of January. So he played 15 games before January, but 14 in the month of January. He's averaging 13, 7 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks per game while shooting 41% from 3. Like Kel'el Ware has I don't even want to say turned himself into. He's always been a really good player, but he's kind of figured it out and starting to figure it out in the NBA, and he's becoming a problem.
And he's also now been garnering comparisons to someone else you've already talked about, Victor Wembanyama. Yeah. You had reposted something from Rob Perez the other day. He wouldn't mention Victor Wembanyama's name just because I'm sure you know what that does whenever you mention somebody who is seen as the next superstar of the National Basketball Association. But do you think those comparisons are fair, or do you think it's just kind of like a flash in the pan right now?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think when you watch how Khalil Ware moves, he does move like Wembanyama. They're both really long, skilled for their size. Wembanyama is obviously more of a wing, while Ware is more of a big. But for anyone who hasn't, I'd highly recommend you watch Khalil Ware's high school highlights because you watch him play and you're like, wait, this is the same guy that Indiana had in the post all game. Because he was, I mean, he's shooting step back threes. It looked a lot more Wembanyama. Obviously, it's high school. But Khalil Ware is such a skilled, talented big. I would not be surprised in the next 5 years if he's like playing more on the perimeter and has the ball in his hands more.
Yeah, and not to say, I know Indiana fans will think of, because I thought about this the moment you said it. I'm sure people will immediately think that, of course, Mike Woodson misused Khalil Ware. Now, no, he still did great things with Indiana and was able to, create. I can't remember. Was he a lottery pick? He was very close to being a lottery pick.
He was like just outside the lottery.
So he did enough to, of course, get where he is right now. But I can just picture him now, because if it popped into my head, it definitely popped into the more angry side of the fan base as well. Like, oh my gosh, imagine what Indiana could have been with Ware if Woodson played him more outside again.
I mean, that roster was extremely flawed outside of Ware.
Yeah. It's again, I know we've already talked Indiana Hoosiers basketball, but I just hate, it used to be so much more fun. It used to be so much. I have not had genuine fun watching Indiana basketball since the Tom Crean days. Actually, that's a little embellished. So the second season with Mike Woodson was really fun. It wasn't the best season in history, of course. You didn't win a Big Ten championship, none of that stuff, but you felt like that team had a chance to make a run in the tournament that year. Of course, they didn't do that. They bowed out of the round of 32. But outside of that, we haven't had any real fun with Indiana men's basketball since Tom Crean, which is, I've seen people online saying they want Tom Crean back, which I can't. I mean, it would be such a fun meme, but I do think I'll say this, and then we won't talk anymore about this, because this is more of just for fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
If Indiana can't get a big name, if they let go of Mike Woodson, and you're left with, I don't even know, to throw out some random options, whoever it may be, some guys from very low level D1 or whatever.
Ben McCollum.
And everybody loves throwing Ben McCollum.
I'm just saying,
people were doing that with Louisville whenever Pat Kelsey was hired. People were saying Ben McCollum should have gotten hired at Louisville. But I think you're going to hear Tom Crean's name thrown around again. And I'm not saying that they should do it, but maybe there's a scenario where, like, hey, if this is the best we can do, we know he loves being here. Why not try Tom Crean 2.0? Now, the number one reason you wouldn't do that is because his most recent stop, which was Georgia, was horrendous.
Yeah.
It was horrendous.
Anthony Edwards and did nothing.
Anyway, we'll put that conversation to bed and maybe humor that again in the future. But last thing I do want to talk about before I let you go, Drew, I want to react to what happened last night in the NFC and AFC championship games. We'll start with the NFC first, just because that one played first in the early afternoon. Commanders. I mean, did the committee screw this one up? Well, just tongue in cheek, right? Why'd the Commanders get in the playoffs, Drew?
Yeah, I don't know. If it was me, I would have put an SEC team in there over them. They didn't play an SEC schedule, so I don't think they can, compete with a team like Alabama or South Carolina. But in all seriousness, this was an incredible year for the Commanders. I mean, they were not even supposed to be close to the playoffs. The fact they made it to the NFC Championship was incredible. They have a superstar in Jaden Daniels. He is legitimately – he might be the best quarterback in the NFC right now. And as a rookie, the NFC quarterbacks aren't great top to bottom, but this kid can play. And
if you're the Bears, you have to be kicking yourself for drafting Caleb Williams and not Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, it's hard, though, because I still believe in Caleb Williams, and I also think that coaching staff is so bad that, I think Ben Johnson –
even Daniels would have failed with the Bears, what you're saying.
Yeah, I think Jane Daniels was not only drafted to a good situation. You don't typically think about that when you think of Washington because of the past owner and past coaches, but new regime, Dan Quinn, Cliff Kingsbury's kind of was the perfect OC for him, and they've kind of clicked. And I really love how Cliff Kingsbury's kind of just like, yeah, you know what, I could get a head coaching job, but I'm gonna stay another year and just ride it out with Jane Daniels because he sees how special this kid is.
And then with the Eagles is this may be an obvious question, but Saquon Barkley, not only is he the best player on that team, but do you feel like he's the best running back currently in the NFL? Again, that may be an obvious question. Now, some people will say Derrick Henry of the Ravens, but I think it's Saquon Barkley by far.
I think it's Saquon. I just think Derrick Henry is elite, but it's what Saquon's doing is it's like ridiculous to watch. He's every single game. It feels like he makes a run that you're like, how did he make that? That 60-yard touchdown run.
Yes.
I am watching that thinking, how is he like, I'm thinking, oh, it's a 15, 20-yard run. Saquon being Saquon. Then nope, breaks it out and then hits the gas and it's gone.
And what's even crazier, like, is remembering him at Penn State. And I know, I don't know if he ever put up massive numbers against Indiana, but surely he had a good run or two against the middling Hoosiers, because of course it wasn't a Signetti-led Hoosiers team.
Yeah.
Maybe he'd run all over a Signetti Hoosiers team anyway. We saw what Jeremiah Love did to Indiana with a 99-yard touchdown rush.
I always remember Saquon, that big kickoff return against Michigan, like the first play of the game, just house call. And
it's always to start the game, isn't it? Always to start the game. Or at least for his first touch, whatever it may be.
I mean,
their opponent will be the Bills, and I don't know if you know this, Drew. I've talked with Kyler
the
about
Chiefs.
this. Or I said backwards, Chiefs. The reason I mentioned Bills, my wife's a Bills fan, and she was super deflated. I've never seen her get so upset about a team losing. I don't know what it is about the Bills. I think she just loves Josh Allen. She loves Sean McDermott. She loves the cast of characters that come with the Buffalo Bills for whatever reason. And to see them lose the way that they did to the Chiefs, I mean, it does feel like the Chiefs are inevitable to do what they do.
Yeah.
But you've got to feel so bad for Josh Allen to be put in this situation now 3 times and you can't get it done, especially knowing you beat him earlier this year on your home field. And you kind of had them on the ropes at multiple points during this game. And, of course, there's a few questionable calls. Did Josh Allen cross the first down threshold late in the game? People are – if it was me, I think he did. But go ahead.
I think, like, that play, it's one of those, like, you couldn't overturn it, and it was whatever was on the field was going to stay. There was a lot – there was some questionable calls for sure. But the fact the Bills couldn't get – it wasn't just that one play. There was multiple instances they needed 1 yard and couldn't get it. And, those are – if you can't get 1 yard in the NFL, you don't deserve to go to the Super Bowl. It's with Josh Allen. So Josh Allen is – him and Jalen Hurts are the 2 guys in the NFL you have at, like, quarterback that's like, 1 yard. That's a free 1 yard most of the time. And they couldn't get 1 yard consistently. And it's a brutal way to end because this felt like the Bills' year.
I know. That's the thing. It feels like – I also put this on Twitter last night. I didn't get really a ton of interaction. But do you feel like the Bills window, or really you can say Josh Allen's window, whoever it may be, the Super Bowl window for that franchise and or Josh Allen, how close is it to fully shutting at this point? How much time does he have to get a ring before it's too late for him?
As a New England native, I want to say Drake May's closing that window quick, but in reality,
so you and Kyler are both Patriots fans.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but in reality, I mean, this window is nowhere near shut. I mean, you look at how the lack of like weapons Josh Allen had outside. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, good tight ends. Khalil Shakir is a good player. Keon Coleman has potential, but Amari Cooper was really disappointing. They thought he was going to be a guy for them outside, and just wasn't that. So if they're they need to add kind of maybe a receiver and a safety. I mean, this Bills team is still so good. When you have Josh Allen, you've seen it with like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Mahomes, like those guys. When you have a quarterback that good, really you're always like a threat to win it all.
Yeah.
And I think Josh Allen is that good. I mean, he, obviously didn't play perfect, but then you think of the plays, like the what ifs, like Dalton Kincaid has to come up with that ball on 4th down. That was an incredible play by Josh Allen to even give his guy a chance.
Well, then you talk about what ifs. I mean, Josh Allen, I felt like he gave 2 or 3 different gifts to Kansas City that they just couldn't come up with interceptions early on.
Yeah, 5 fumbles, Buffalo recovered them all.
Yeah, that's insane. Last thing, and then we'll wrap this up. Do you think it's Chiefs 3-peat or does Jalen Hurts and Philadelphia get it done?
I can't believe I'm saying this. I hope it's Philly. I really hope it's Philly, but I just can't bet against Patrick Mahomes. It's just he feels so inevitable, and I saw a stat talking about Mahomes in like end of games in overtime. I think like the best quarterbacks of all time, like Brady in the final minute of a game when he has a drive to tie the game or take the lead, he's 5 for 11. Like Drew Brees was like up there, was 3 for 6. Like these are some of the best all time. Like in this stat, Mahomes was 7 of 7 entering Sunday.
And I know I said that was last question, but let's just say Chiefs do three-peat. Like, what is stopping them from continuing? Like, what is going to be the kryptonite for this Chiefs franchise? Is it going to be Andy Reid eventually retiring? Does Travis Kelce need to retire? Like, what's it going to be that finally shows a crack in the armor for the Chiefs if they're able to get it done in the Super Bowl again?
Yeah, I mean, I think if I would not be surprised if Travis Kelce retires after they win the Super Bowl. But I mean,
I keep seeing the joke that they're gonna win, they're gonna interview him, and he's gonna propose to Taylor Swift, and then ride off into the sunset.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. The Chiefs, they draft so well. That's one of the biggest things. You look at their young guys on like rookie contracts. They're not paying a lot of money. They're performing like Trent McDuffie, George Karlaftis from Purdue. Like you see these guys come in and they continue to draft, and if you continue to do that, there's really no stopping them. So can we? And I do want to say one more thing. Taylor Swift fans have had 2 years of football as fans, and they've gone to 2 Super Bowls. There's fan bases that have been like watching football for 40 years and they've never seen a Super Bowl. Detroit, Cleveland.
I've got to say, props to my wife. She loves Taylor Swift, but she cannot stand how she is with the Chiefs and all that nonsense. She hasn't jumped onto the Chiefs bandwagon. She sticks with the Bills, and I can give her major props for that.
Yeah.
Drew, I appreciate your time as always, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
A big thanks to Drew Rosenberg for his time and good discussion. And, of course, we'll check in with him every so often about all things basketball. And even, I guess, we talk a little NFL with some people every so often. So appreciate him for doing that as well. We'll probably leave the basketball talk right there in the dust to settle for a little bit. But if you have any comments, I'm just curious. Thoughts on, I know we dove into a little bit of the, who's next conversation when it comes to head coaches. So if you want to weigh in on who you would like to see if Indiana moves on from Mike Woodson, who would you want to be the next head man? Because I know most people, you can throw out whoever you want. I know most people's answer will be, Scott Drew, Bruce Pearl, Billy Donovan, the guys who are honestly some of them might be pipe dreams. Like, we got to think about this for a second, folks. I'm starting to sound like Joe Biden, not meaning to. It was kind of just a joke, obviously. But if you're, me saying that, of course, makes me lose my train of thought. Look at Louisville and Kentucky. They both thought that they would get big names this past offseason for basketball because of their brands. They all thought they'd get the Scott Drews, the Dan Hurleys, basically any big name they could think of. They're like, we're Louisville, we're Kentucky, we can get whoever we want. And initially, they were humbled with Pat Kelsey and Mark Pope. And my God, the initial response from Kentucky fans when they hired Mark Pope was hilarious. And now look where they are. Both teams doing phenomenal this year. Now, I know Pat Kelsey and Louisville, how good are they actually? That's kind of, it's honestly, it's kind of like Indiana football right now, because the ACC, not very good in basketball outside of maybe Duke. Wake Forest might be okay as well. Excuse me. But Pat Kelsey, and they're on the verge of a 10-game winning streak. And Kentucky, I know they're coming off a loss to Vanderbilt, but they were in the top 10 under their first year with Mark Pope, whenever a lot of people had immediately written him off as being a good coach. So if Indiana does move on from Mike Woodson, if they don't get the big name, I don't think we need to panic. We don't need to panic if we get to that point. We'll talk more about that in the future, but I'm curious. Initial thoughts. Share who you want to see be the next head coach for Indiana basketball. And I'm curious, especially for those who don't want just like the Bruce Pearls and, the names I just mentioned earlier. If you have somebody that maybe nobody's really mentioning or talking about, let me know who that is in the comments, and maybe we'll do that over the next couple of episodes once we bank a few more comments on the YouTube channel. So feel free to do that. We'll move on from the basketball discussion here over these last few minutes here on a Monday. But let's get to some good news. So over the last couple of episodes, I talked about Bryant Haines and the different jobs he'd been mentioned for to potentially leave Indiana. Well, Indiana has doubled down on their commitment to defensive coordinator Bryant Haines, as he has now signed a new contract. And he will now, this is according to Matt Zenitz, by the way, so give him some credit. But he is, I had this number in front of me earlier. I'm just going to go off of it by memory. If I'm incorrect on this, my apologies. But I believe his new contract, he's been extended 3 years for $1.8 million. And I don't know how, like, I'm sure a lot of that came from leverage from the other potential offers he could have received from Notre Dame and Penn State, but that's awesome. I'm glad Indiana's, paying the guy. That keeps everybody happy. He gets paid more. The players stick around. You have the continuity, and now let's get ready for the 2025 season. I really hope that Indiana can keep the ball rolling in the next fall. I don't want to talk next year about how the last season was a fluke. I want it to be, this is how Indiana football is now. They're going to be regularly competing in the upper level of the Big Ten. They don't have to win the conference every year. They don't have to win the conference ever. It'd be great if they can figure out how to do it every once in a while, but I think the dream for a lot of Indiana football fans is be competitive every year. Get in the playoff as often as you can, especially now that it's going to be so much more doable with 12 teams. And maybe I'm taking what Indiana did for granted last year, but I think there's going to be more opportunities where that came from. Maybe I'm too cocky, who knows? But I think there is a good chance we see Indiana push for another really good season. Now, I remember I initially said 9-3 for Indiana. That's just me assuming they'll slip up on the road in some tough environments. Doesn't mean they're going to be bad or that much worse. Like, the schedule will not always be as favorable as it was this past season. And you go on the road at Oregon, who is in the playoff, at Illinois, who had a really good season not at Illinois. They play in Illinois at home. That's still going to be a tough home game. At Iowa, who destroyed you on the road the most recent time you played them. And I know that was under a different regime, but still tough environment, Kinnick Stadium. Excuse me. And then Penn State, of course, also coming off a really good run in the college football playoff. So I know, unfortunately, it will be a Tom Allen-less Penn State team. Would have been nice to see Indiana, of course, go up against their former head coach and kind of go up against each other, see how Indiana can do against a Tom Allen-led defense. Maybe they'll get their shot. They go and face Clemson at some point in the CFP or in a bowl game. You get to go up against that Tom Allen defense. Of course, you prefer it to be in the playoff, but nonetheless, it would be good regardless. I don't know. I had this weird pain just come into my head, so that's why you see me rubbing my temple right there. But yeah, Indiana football, I'd say at this point, the staffing is probably set. The roster, I know there's one more transfer portal window, so we may see a few more surprises once we get to that portion of the offseason. And what's great about college football is it's basically year-round at this point. We're just a few months away from spring football. I don't know when the spring game will be this year. It's usually in April, if I'm not mistaken, but still, we're almost in February, just a couple of months away from that. So that'll be interesting to, look forward to, of course, right? And then speaking of spring, though, it's also almost Indiana baseball season. And we won't talk a whole lot about baseball. We'll mention it maybe more so than we do some of the other sports, because it is baseball, especially Indiana's had some really good baseball teams over the years. But we'll follow along with the baseball season. They had their first practice the other day, head coach Jeff Mercer. And I wanted to take a look at some of the early schedule for the Indiana baseball Hoosiers before we wrap things up here on a Monday. They will, almost said kickoff or tip off. So if we say kickoff for football and tip off for basketball, what do you say? You tee off? That'd be more for golf. You don't tee off for baseball, especially because you're not hitting off of a tee. It's not tee ball. Pitch off. Who cares? I thought I'd think of something funny, but I guess not. The baseball season will get rolling for Indiana on February 14th, Valentine's Day, on a little Valentine's baseball action in the Sanderson Ford College Baseball Classic in Surprise, Arizona. The Indiana baseball team will take on UNLV. Then they'll take on Xavier, Oregon State, and then UNLV once again. And I don't remember exactly who won the College World Series last year, but I feel like Oregon State was in the championship game. Next time we talk baseball, I'll do a little more research and try to confirm some of that. And I'll have to look and see what the preseason top 25 looks like for the college baseball season coming up. Then they'll play their first home game right after that on February 19th. What will likely be a brisk home afternoon, 4 p.m. against Purdue Fort Wayne, Bart Kaufman Field. There used to be a time where you wouldn't play home games this early in the schedule if you were a Midwestern/Northern team. You normally spend the early portion of your schedule entirely below the Mason-Dixon line, right? But after that game, they'll go to Cary, North Carolina, and play an out-of-conference game against Northwestern, followed by matchups with Fordham and Harvard. Then they'll return to Bloomington once again to face Xavier. And then they'll head down to Deland, Florida, in what appears to be another tournament with a couple of mid-majors, Mount St. Mary's and Stetson. And then they'll return home for what is the more traditional part of the schedule. They'll have a midweek against Northern Kentucky, and then they'll dive headfirst into Big Ten play on March 7th on the road with a 3-game series at Penn State. So we may do a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the baseball happenings, check out the roster, look at some preseason polls and that sort of thing. If people are into that, actually, that's another thing. If you're still listening to the show, I'm curious, how much baseball talk do you enjoy? I used to be super into college baseball, and I can still be that way if I really want to get into it. But I'm curious if that's something you guys are into. Let me know if you like the talking baseball, and if so, maybe I'll try to work it in a little more often than I do some of the other non-revenue sports. So with that being said, we'll wrap up today's show. Appreciate you guys checking it out. As always, be sure to subscribe right here on Hoosier Illustrated. And, of course, check out everything going on at the website, HoosierIllustrated.com. Of course, Drew, Kyler, Alec, and Dylan all have a lot of good stuff going on, especially this week, Purdue week. I know it's not as exciting as normally it would be with all of the negativity surrounding the Indiana basketball program. But, hey, that's just where we are right now. So until Wednesday, this has been another edition of In Touch with Indiana Sports, powered by HoosierIllustrated.com.